Let's talk about health checks in ASP.NET Core. Health checks are an automated way for you to know what is the health of your system. This can include your API itself and also any external components you might be using. For example, we are using a PostgreSQL database, a Redis cache, and Keycloak as an external identity provider. So first, let me show you how to incorporate health checks into your system. You're going to need to add the health check services by saying builder services add health checks, and then you need to expose an endpoint where you will be able to query the health of your system. You can do this by calling the map health checks method and specifying the endpoint where you want to expose your health checks. I like to call this endpoint just health, and if I send a GET request to this endpoint, I will get this system health status. If you want to implement a health check, you can do this yourself. For example, let's implement a custom SQL health check, and all we have to do is implement the iHealthCheck interface. This interface only contains one method, which is called checkHealthAsync, and inside of it you need to verify the status of your system. For our custom health check, I'm going to use my iSQL connection factory, and I'm going to inject it using the primary constructor feature, which is available in .NET 8, and this will allow me to query the database in my checkHealthAsync method. So let's use the SQL connection factory to create a database connection. Let's introduce a variable to hold this connection, and I'm also going to define it inside of a using statement so that I properly dispose of any resources. Now for the actual implementation of the health check, I'm just going to execute a scalar query. For example, it could be asynchronous, and let's say I just want to select one from my database and return this as a value. And if this succeeds, I'm going to return a health check result of healthy. Of course, our database could fail, so it's important that you wrap this inside of a try-catch statement, and once you catch the exception, you can decide if you want to log it, or you can just return a health check result of unhealthy, which also allows you to pass in the exception as an argument. This will log the exception details as part of the health check result, and this is how you can implement a simple health check for a SQL database. To actually configure the health check, you need to call the add check method after you add the health check services and specify your health check type and the name of your health check. So let's start the API and query the health endpoint. The health check for our API is exposed on the health endpoint. So if I send this GET request, we're going to hit the breakpoint inside of our custom SQL health check, and once we complete our database query, we're going to return a healthy response. If I stop the container that's running our database, which is PostgreSQL, and run the health check again, you'll see that this time our query is going to fail because we can't connect to the database, and we're going to return an unhealthy response. Notice that the status code is also 503 service unavailable. However, if I spin up the database container again and the database starts running, after we send the request, you'll see that we get back a 200 OK and a healthy response. The actual result returned by this endpoint by default isn't really useful, so let me show you how we can improve it. I'm going to add a NuGet package to the Bookify API project, and I'm going to look for health checks. The NuGet package that I want to install is ASP.NET Core Health Checks UI Client. Let's install the latest version of this library, and if I go back to my program file, after I have configured my health check endpoint, I have an option to pass in an instance of the health check options. So let's create a new instance, and what I want to do is set the response writer. The library that I just installed allows me to reference a delegate, which is on the UI response writer class, and the method name is writeHealthCheck UI response. So let me show you how this minor change drastically improves the health check response that we get back from our API. I'm going to query our health check endpoint again, and this time we get back a JSON response. It contains the overall status of our system's health, and you can see that the system is healthy. We also get the duration for the health check query, and you can see the individual entries representing the health checks that we are running. In this case, we only have one health check, which is our custom SQL health check. However, I don't suggest that you write custom health checks. So let me show you a better way to add health checks to your system. I'm going to completely remove the custom health check that I added here, and I'm also going to get rid of the add health checks registration, and we're going to be adding this inside of our infrastructure project. Let me move over to the infrastructure project, and let's add some NuGet packages inside. I'm going to look for the health checks libraries, and if you take a look, you will see that there are a lot of built-in health checks that you can just add as NuGet packages. For example, here's the health check for SQL Server, a health check for Redis, a health check for URI groups, RabbitMQ, PostgreSQL, MongoDB, Azure Storage, and so on. The ones that I want to install are the MPG SQL for our PostgreSQL database. Then I'm going to add the Redis health check, and I'm also going to add the URI's health check that will help me check the status of Keycloak. So with our health checks installed, let's go to the dependency injection class, and I'm going to add a new method inside called add health checks. I'm going to call the add health checks method like I did earlier, only this time I'm going to chain a few calls to the custom health checks that we added with the respective libraries. So this is the health check for our SQL database, and I just need to pass in the connection string to my database. I need to do the same for the Redis health check, and for the URL group check, I need to pass in what is the URL that will be queried for the health check, what HTTP method to use, and the name of the health check. This is the approach I'm using to verify the status of my Keycloak service, and I need to call this method from the add infrastructure method on top so that we actually register all of our health checks with dependency injection. And let me go to my application settings development JSON file and add the base URL key for Keycloak. Now I'm referencing the internal port because this is how my API will be able to reach Keycloak. And let's start the API and see how the health response changes. If I query the health check endpoint again, you will see that we get back a 200 OK response, indicating that our API is healthy, and you can see the individual health checks that I have here for PostgreSQL, Redis, and Keycloak. If I stop the containers for the Redis and the database service and run the health check endpoint again, it's going to take some time for the actual queries to time out, and eventually we get back a response. And you can see that the status is unhealthy because our PostgreSQL check has failed and our Redis check has also failed. If I start these services again and rerun my health check query, we're going to get back a healthy result because all of the services are functioning as normal. So you can see how easy it is to integrate health checks with ASP.NET Core. I prefer using the pre-built health check libraries because they make it much easier to introduce health checks, and it's less error prone because these libraries are regularly maintained. If you have a dependency without an existing health check library, only in that case I would consider writing a custom health check. And if you don't know why health checks are useful, it's because you can set up monitoring support on your health check endpoint. Most cloud providers allow you to configure an endpoint that's going to be monitored every few seconds or every few minutes, and as long as this endpoint returns a 200 OK response, nothing bad is going to happen. But if you get a 503 service unavailable, meaning that your API isn't able to function as expected, then you can configure what's going to happen. For example, you can figure out that your database isn't running and you can restart it. You can determine that your API is completely unavailable and it's time to implement a failover scenario where you can configure the cloud provider to spin up a new application instance and terminate the old one. And you can also plug in some alerting where you can start getting email or Slack notifications when a health check fails. This is everything I wanted to show you about health checks, so let's jump on to the next topic.